Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPad mini first generation and see how this particular iPad holds up in 2025. Now, there's a couple of different things to keep in mind here. Number one, I don't really necessarily know if this would be one of the first devices that I would recommend people to buy. I think there might be some better options out there for you. So that's always kind of one of those big things to keep in mind here. I'm personally, I'm a big fan of these types of devices. I think they give us a lot of capability, but if you are in the market, I think there's probably some better devices out there that I would highly recommend buying for the most part. So if you want to pick up those iPads, I'll go ahead and leave those linked down in the description below. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of these devices. Number one, the first big thing to keep in mind here is that if you are about to go through and pick up a device, you probably don't want to pick up a 13-year-old technology, device for the most part. With something like the iPad mini 1, this is one of those types of iPads that came out back in 2012. So that was quite a bit of time ago. That was not just yesterday, it was a very long time ago in today's standards. So that right there is probably going to be one of the biggest takeaways here. I would hate for you to go through and buy a device like this if it's already going to kind of be outdated by the time you pick it up. And that is essentially what's going on here. On the front side, you're getting a 7.9-inch IPS LCD panel. So this type of screen, like I said before, it's a very basic type of display. There's not really anything, that we haven't already seen inside of this display that we haven't seen in other ones. But it actually was kind of interesting because within a display like this design that Apple put inside of this iPad, they kept inside of all their other iPad minis up until the iPad mini 6. So the mini 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, they pretty much kept the same exact design. They didn't change it until the iPad mini, the iPad mini 6? That is actually a kind of a crazy thing that ended up happening there. But it's, again, not the biggest deal in the world, but that was just kind of one of those big things that ended up kind of happening there for the most part. But if you're going to go through and pick up an iPad, maybe you'll be okay with the design. You'll be getting the, lightning port at the bottom, which is always pretty nice to have, but, USB-C is definitely way better. But again, having lightning is probably good for the most part for a lot of people too. Now, you're also going to be able to go through and still get these curved sides on your iPads, which is always nice. And then you're also going to be able to go through and get that camera setup. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that Apple kind of ended up doing around this time, but I will still tell you, this design of this iPad mini, it still feels very good. It doesn't really feel that bad. And I do think that is in and of itself kind of a crazy situation to be in, because you're able to go through and buy this type of iPad and still you're able to get a really decent experience with it. Again, it's not perfect, but Apple did a really decent job with the design language of this iPad. And I do think that is kind of one of the coolest things to kind of keep in mind here with this type of device when it comes down to it. So from that side in and of itself, I will probably tell you that makes me a massive fan of this type of device. And if I'm about to go through and pick up an iPad, this is definitely one of the cooler types of devices that I can go and pick up. So from that side, I would say that kind of covers it up there for the most part. Now, on top of that, another very big thing to keep in mind here too, I would not recommend people to buy this device anymore if you couldn't tell, but another really interesting thing here is its price tag. This iPad doesn't really cost as much as it used to, right? So it's not really a super cheap iPad, anymore, or it's not an expensive iPad anymore, but it's not the cheapest thing in the world either. And I would hate for people to go through and buy this type of device expecting it to be a super good, affordable iPad, because it really is not, if I'm being honest. This type of iPad is essentially going to be giving you, a price tag of about maybe less than $100 right now. So that right there could be a pretty interesting takeaway to have inside of a device. Imagine being able to go through and buy an iPad like this that's going to be giving you that type of caliber. I think that's actually quite interesting. Although, again, it wouldn't be the first iPad I'd recommend people to buy. It's definitely not a bad priced iPad by any means. From a camera side, this thing's giving you a 5-megapixel camera on the back side. Then it's giving you a 1.2 megapixel standard camera on the front side. So that right there, again, is actually kind of an interesting thing to have inside of an iPad. Because, again, this would not be an iPad I'd recommend anyone to buy, but it still is going to be giving you, for a 2012 device, the camera itself is actually not terrible. So it's always been something kind of interesting here. But again, I probably wouldn't recommend anyone to go through and buy this device anymore. There's definitely far better iPads out there for people to go and pick up rather than this one. And when it comes down to the camera side, like I said, I think this thing did a decent job for the most part. I think at the time it was like a good iPad, but it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense for people to go and buy this iPad anymore, because it is going to be somewhat of like a limited type of experience, a fairly limited type of device when it comes down to it from that side. So from that side in and of itself, that kind of covers it up there for the most part. Now, when it comes down to software updates, this is also another very big takeaway. You probably don't want to go ahead and buy an iPad that's already kind of done getting software updates. And that is precisely what's going on here if you're going through and buying this type of iPad. This iPad, not only is it done getting software updates, but it's basically been done getting software updates for quite a few years now. So once again, I would just kind of hate for you to go through and buy this type of device if it's already kind of outdated with software. And like I said before, that is kind of precisely what's going on here. So I do think there's probably better options out there for you than going through and buying this type of device. So I probably would say, if you're going to go through and pick up a certain device, I'd recommend looking elsewhere, maybe looking at a device that still is giving you some sort of software updates rather than this one. What is interesting though, the battery life was always pretty decent inside of these types of devices too. Like they weren't really that bad. iPads typically, did have like pretty decent battery lives, and that was essentially what was going on here as well. So with an iPad like this, you're actually getting like a pretty decent type of experience. Again, it's not a perfect type of battery life, but if you're planning on buying an iPad and, you're still looking for like a pretty decent experience, this thing is actually not too bad, So I think that right there is kind of an interesting thing. Again, it wouldn't be a reason why I'd recommend buying this iPad, but you are basically getting like a pretty decent, like not a terrible experience from the battery life department. At the same time though, I do think that there might be some better options when it does kind of come down to the, performance. This thing was basically giving you the Apple A5 chipset inside of it with 1 gigabyte of RAM. I believe that's kind of the same chipset as something like an iPad, like an iPhone 5. So that right there is going to be another very big key takeaway. It's like, why would you want to go ahead and buy this type of iPad there, right? Like, why would you not want to go ahead and buy an iPad that's going to be giving you better performance? This type of iPad for very basic stuff, it might be able to give you like an okay type of experience. But if you're wanting to go ahead and really kind of take it up a notch and really kind of take it to the next level, this thing is just really not going to be, taking you there. I think this type of device is going to be giving you a very limited type of experience from that particular side. And that's, again, just kind of what ends up happening when you're going to go through and pick up one of these types of devices, right? It's like, why would you want to go ahead and buy a device like this when you can go through and buy a different one? And that is exactly what's going on here in this particular situation. So in my personal opinion, right, if I'm about to go through and pick up a device, I kind of do think that there are way better devices for me to go and pick up, like kind of rather than these types of devices when it comes down to it. I think with a device like an iPad mini, like an iPad mini 1, this thing was probably okay when it first came out, but it really does not make any sense at all for anyone to go ahead and buy any of these types of devices anymore, I don't think. I think there's way better devices for people to go and pick up. And because of that, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for anybody to go and pick any of these things up, to be honest. I would recommend people to buy like an iPad mini 1 or an iPad mini, I would recommend people to buy an iPad mini, 6, an iPad mini 7, an M1 iPad Air 5. Those types of iPads, I would highly recommend people to buy more, kind of rather than this one. Like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense whatsoever for really anyone to go ahead and buy any of these types of iPads anymore. There's significantly better options out there, and that's just kind of the way I see it for the most part. So from that particular perspective, that kind of covers it up there for the most part. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.